Good afternoon, everyone. This is Queenie Clem with Queenie's Book Talk and Reviews, and I am your literary ambassador. And today I have a special guest on my channel. Please introduce yourself to us.
Yes, my name is Louis Kenneth Ritter, author of a book called Turbulence, Dispatches from the Student Protest Movement, Rutgers, 1970. I'm a retired teacher, writer, and I've been doing this for a number of years, and this is probably the greatest moment just to be able to speak to people about my book, because I think it's great. But I've written screenplays, and this is my first novel, but it's really like the first of hopefully a series of novels. And maybe someday it'll be a TV series, and that would be great.
Oh, okay. So what is your genre and what attracted you to this genre?
Okay, genre is historical fiction. And what attracted to me was the fact that I had been at Rutgers in the 1970s when the book took place. And what happened was I was working with some guys who were trying to put together a TV production company, and they said, well, we need some ideas and properties. So I thought back, and I recalled that I was at Rutgers in 1970. 1972, Jane Fonda came to speak to Rutgers, and I said, oh, that's an interesting way to start a series. So I wrote a TV script over like a 10-year period, and then I was writing freelance for this thing called TVWriter.com, and the guy who ran it said, hey, this would make a good book. And so 2.5 years later, the book came out. So I have a TV series perspective, streaming series, and a novel, and hopefully it'll go from there.
Okay. What inspired you to start writing?
I've been thinking about this probably since middle school, junior high, middle school, whatever you want to call it now. I was always very creative. There was a British TV show called The Avengers in the 1960s. And I loved the show, and I would write what I guess I would call flash fiction. And then Star Trek came along, and I did that for that. And it's always been like my guiding star, or just something that I always aspired to. It was my talent. Okay. And so I pursued it all these years.
Wow. Now tell us about your book and briefly describe it.
Okay, the book again is called Turbulence, and the subtext is Dispatches from the Student Protest Movement, Rutgers, 1970. At that time, this was just after the Kent State incident, and the student protests were pretty active. They were protesting mostly the Vietnam War, but it was also civil rights, gay rights. Feminism was starting out at that point, and a lot of other protests. It was just a very colorful era. And I think, from what I can see, I think I've cornered the market in that field, because I haven't found too many other books dealing with that subject. But it was a labor of love. It was things I knew. And, as I said, I started off writing as a TV series, and I fell in love with the characters. And I'm currently working on books 2 and 3. And maybe other things. So it's just a labor of love. And I've inspired myself, because I wanted to write for TV. And at one point I thought I'd be a copywriter for a New York ad agency. But basically it's been like my entire life. I knew that this is what I wanted to do.
Amen. What are the conflicts that the students face in your story?
Well, okay. The first one, Danny, the main character, he wants to be a journalist for the college newspaper, but he's opposed by the editor, who doesn't like him very much and gives him these bad stories. There's Alex, the beautiful feminist. She's conflicted because she wants to have a career in an era when most women came to college looking for what they used to call the MRS degree, in other words, getting married. Pam Winters comes out as gay sometime later in the series. There's Fred Turner. He's African American. He's sort of like the only Black student in the dormitory. Barry Lipkin is a radical, and he's based on a friend of mine. I've known this fellow for like 50 years. So there's plenty of conflicts. And then there's Dean Mansbach, who basically is like this really tough, intimidating guy who is like the head administrator. So there's plenty of conflicts. There is just overwhelmingly great characters, in my opinion, and a lot of conflicts, potential and realized.
Okay. Now tell us about the characters Danny and Jim.
Okay. Danny comes from a place called Jersey Shore, Pennsylvania. Now, this is a real place. One of the first people I met at Rutgers was a young farm boy from Jersey Shore, Pennsylvania. And I thought, wow, this really can't be happening. He was a wrestler, and he and I became friends over the course of a couple of years. But I used him as the background because Danny wanted to be a journalist, but he was also, the son of a farmer and very patriotic. And he becomes the advisor of the dormitory, and that allows him to interact with a lot of very interesting characters. And my favorite, well, I have so many favorites. My favorite is Alex, the girl. She's gorgeous, but she's also, like I said, a budding feminist, and she has a conflict with the other co-eds because they're looking for getting married, having 5 kids and living in suburbia somewhere. And she's against that, or at least she has other interests. And so she conflicts. Then Barry wants to be the leader of the student protest movement, and he runs into opposition from the guy who's basically running it at the point. And there's the conflict there. And each of the characters I've developed has a goal that they're moving towards. And I think that creates a lot of tension, a lot of interest. And I think the plot develops because Danny gets fired from the newspaper and basically has a choice to either try and resolve that or else drop out of college and maybe get drafted to serve in the Vietnam War, which was very unpopular at the time.
Okay. Can you read a snippet from your book?
Sure. Okay, this is the first page. Rutgers, autumn 1970. There are many unpleasant moments in life that you cannot avoid and must confront head on despite your fears. For Danny Watkins, late teens, lanky with brown hair, glasses, and a worldly expression, this was a moment that he had truly dreaded. He dredged up the stairs to the office of the Daily Targum, the college newspaper. He took a deep breath and proceeded up the stairs. He hesitated before entering, certain that no matter what he did, Morris, the editor of the paper, would find fault with his story. Jim Morris, in his early 20s, was a large, ill-tempered man with a full beard and a gut from drinking too much beer. Morris was a brutal taskmaster who demanded much from his young staff. Danny had suffered from a bad relationship with his mercurial editor. It was the height of the Vietnam War protests on campus around the country. Rutgers and other college campuses were rocked daily by large-scale protests opposing the war in Vietnam. Danny wanted to cover these protests, but Morris kept giving him stories that Danny considered trivial or uninteresting. Danny enters the newsroom and spots some of his fellow reporters sitting at a desk. They eyed Danny as he entered, but they turned away and refused to make eye contact. Danny knew what was coming and was clear that his other reporters did not wish to be in Zeus's line of fire when he hurled his thunderbolts. "Is that Danny? Tell him to get his ass in here," Morris roared from his office. Danny suspected the meeting would not be pleasant, given the facts of that transpired that evening at the board meeting. He knew that he was entering the lion's den and that he would probably be the next meal. As he entered, Morris slammed the door behind him. "I just got a phone call from the dean," thundered Morris with a totally "if looks could kill" expression on his face. His mouth twisted into a demonic grimace. "Where are the notes on the building fund?" Morris hissed. The questions were in a rapid-fire order. Danny had no time to pause and think about what he had to say. He handed him his notebook. Morris scoured the notes with a look of acrid distaste. They were gibberish. Where's the stuff about the dean's decision on the endowment fund? Danny sputtered. He didn't know what to say. He knew that his ticket had been punched. I did them in a hurry, he said. Morris shook his head, eyeing the notebook again with indecipherable gibberish, and he ripped him into shreds, tossing him in the nearby garbage can. Danny, I gave you an important assignment for covering the Board of Governors meeting. You effed it up, he said, shaking his head. Okay. Danny bowed his head. He had a wave of nausea strike him. It was getting worse. Morris stared at him with a bitter, cold expression full of disdain. Not an ounce of remorse. It was his job to punish Danny for his misdeeds. You represent us, the paper, thundered Morris. I understand, said Danny, his voice weak and face filled with doubt. Do you really understand, Morris ranted as he paced around the floor. Danny knew that his job was on the line. It was possible that he would lose his scholarship and be forced to leave school. Many students who dropped out of school lost their student deferment and risked a fate worse than death by being drafted into the Army. Danny felt his facade crumble. I'll call and explain that it was my fault. Danny hoped to mollify Morris and deflect any errors. Danny was wrong. Morris was not in a conciliatory mood. He rose out of his seat, face beet red with anger, and confronted Danny. There isn't going to be a next time, he bellowed at the young, defenseless reporter. Danny was riveted to the spot. The words echoed through Danny's brain. All he could hear were the words, no next time. We're printing an apology. Do not even bother signing out. Yeah, get out. Hunched over, Danny exited the building, red-faced and embarrassed. Danny's world had just collapsed. He contemplated his future, and it seemed very bleak. He would carry himself back to his dorm. Even though it was a short distance away, the distance became never-ending. He had no idea what he would do to redeem himself or his career. End of excerpt.
Wow.
Thank you.
Interesting story. Wow.
Yeah.
So what is your writing style like?
Well, I do third person. I don't really enjoy doing first person, but what I'm learning is writing structure, very important, and also what they call show and tell, which is to be very visual, because if you're not, then readers are not going to stick with the story for the most part. So that would be my writing style, I guess. You know, I'm really learning my craft and I think I've grasped a lot of it, but it's always more things you can learn.
Okay. What are the key messages in your story?
The key message is never give up, okay? Because my main character, even though he gets defeated several times, keeps going until he manages to triumph and get this exclusive interview. Key messages were how much fun, I think, how much more fun the era was than some of the things going on today. But also to be honest with yourself, to be determined, to be your best, and to give your best when you're called on. And when fate calls you to do something, you know, you just don't give up, never quit. And
Amen.
at least in the book, he wins.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What do you find to be the hardest part about writing?
Well, finding an idea that really can carry you through to the end.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was lucky because I sort of knew where the story was going, but coming up with an idea, and here's the thing, well, I've run into a lot of people who say, hey, I'm going to write the next Star Wars. Number one, you're never going to get it published because they have the copyright. Number two, you have no idea really that the idea is that good. So in a novel, I went from a 10,000 page script, TV teleplay they called, to an 80,000 page word novel. And that was hard because I knew where the story was going, but I had to flesh out an enormous amount of characters,
Mm-hmm.
their backgrounds, their motivations. And I read a number of really excellent books on how to write novels. And I've learned a lot. And I'm still learning. I still watch like some YouTube videos and buy books, you know, so I feel I've come a long way, but I still have, you know, probably a big journey to go. But that's it.
What has influenced you the most as a writer?
Influenced me the most, I think the fact that I've always wanted to be a writer, but when I was younger, I had a chance, I met Larry Gelbart, who's the producer of MASH. It was a TV series in the 70s. And we actually met and talked, and he was really impressed, with my dedication. But I really felt like this was my most important moment in life. It was an accidental meeting, but it was great because it encouraged me that there was a future in it. And then I went on and did other things, in the last couple of 40 years or so. But I've always felt like this is what I have to do in life.
Right, right. How do you develop your characters and your plots?
Oh, okay. Well, the characters, in this case, basically, I knew that there were certain prototypes, I don't know if that's the correct word, but certain types of people that I wanted in the story.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I knew Danny had to be the advisor to the dorm because this way he could interact with the different characters in an interesting way. That he wanted to be a newspaper guy because that was the basic storyline. And some of the other people, oh, okay. There was this young woman who was very attractive, who was an early feminist. So I just remembered some of the things about her and built my character of Alex around her. And my friend Larry, who I've known for like 50 plus years, was a radical. He was a member of SDS. And I basically renamed him. He was everything the character was. He's tall, thin, very well spoken, articulate, and he was great with the girls. And Pam Winters, well, I had a friend who came out as a gay person in his junior year, and we were friendly, and it didn't matter to me. But so eventually, what happened was I was in a workshop, and they said, "Well, you need more women in the story." So I made the guy who's gay. I made him a woman, and I used the name of this girlfriend that I'd known, in high school. So you usually start off with people you know, and then develop them from there. That's my easiest answer.
Wow. Now tell us about your publishing journey.
Oh, okay. Well, as I said, I started writing the TV series back in 2013, and I went through a number of what they call updates or revisions, and I was lucky to meet the guy from this workshop. And long story short, he's now the director of a Broadway show. But when I was writing for this thing called TV Writer, the guy said, "Well, do it as a novel," and I struggled. I wrote a lot of letters to agents, and there was no interest that I could see of. But I was friendly with this one guy who's a veteran from Vietnam. He had worked for the VA, and he'd written a couple of novels. And we talked back and forth, and I said, well, maybe I want to do this after all. So I went ahead, wrote the novel, went through a bunch of drafts, and I found a small publisher in Oregon, and I guess it's called really more self-publishing. It's not the traditional way, but so she did the layout, she did the graphics and all that stuff, and she was wonderful. And I was lucky to find what they call a development editor. This woman, basically every single page, she would write comments and questions about why they're doing this when they didn't do it, page so-and-so. So I had a wonderful team. They just encouraged me at every step of the way. And 2.5 years later, the book came out, and I'm so inspired that I have book 2 on the verge, and book 3, I have a very rough draft that I'll probably start working on maybe in a month or two. But theoretically, I could keep going all the way to the early 1980s, the disco era, the gas crisis, New York going bankrupt. There's so much. It's such a rich era. And I don't think, as far as I can see, I don't think anyone else has tapped into it. But I think that baby boomers, and this is really important, baby boomers will read this and go, yeah, I remember when I was in college, and I remember doing all this, going to parties. And I met Bruce Springsteen before he became famous, which is true. But it's such a rich era that, I could easily do, 5 or 10 novels, if there's a market for it. But I think baby boomers will latch onto this nostalgia, I guess is a good word,
Mhm.
but they're going to see it as, yeah, I remember when I did this, and I remember what happened when I did that. And I think it's just a very rich era, and I don't think it's really been explored.
Okay. What do you want readers to take away from your book?
Well, again, what I would like them to take is that it's a good story. It keeps them hooked. You know, the ending is sort of unexpected, but also the fact that, you know, these characters are so good that they want, I'm hoping, excuse me, I'm hoping that they'll go, hey, I hope there's a book 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. I don't expect to be the next Harry Potter or Hunger Games, but, you know, if I have an audience that enjoys this era, historical fiction, and comes away with, gee, that was fun. You know, it reminds me of the day that I did so and so. Then that'll be good. And if Oprah Winfrey wants to find my book, well, that would be great too. But I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. So
Who is your target audience?
oh, I would definitely say the baby boomer generation,
Mhm.
because, you know, most of them went to school when I was going to school, went through a lot of the same experiences. And I think that, you know, as I said before, I think that a lot of them will, if they pick up the book, they'll say, hey, I just remembered, you know, going to dances, going to fraternity parties, joining fraternities, you know, going to protests, you know, having fun. It was a different time, obviously, but it was, in a lot of ways, I think it was freer and more interesting.
Mhm.
And so that's what I hope to get out of it. That it's a good read, and that, you know, it brings back good memories for them.
Okay. What is your inspiration behind the story?
My inspiration was, again, I was working with these screenwriters who wanted to do a production company, and they were looking for product, just as now everybody's allegedly looking for streaming projects.
Mhm.
So I was originally going to do, you know, I'd written a couple of other full-length features, but they weren't that good, to be very honest. But when I thought about it, I said, well, I was in a fraternity, and I thought there was a movie called Animal House, which was very popular at the time. And I thought about that, but then I said, well, wait a minute. Jane Fonda came to speak at Rutgers in 1972, which is true. And I thought about it, that became the basis. And then I had characters, but they're all like these, you know, young white guys, for lack of a better term, because these are the people I was hanging out with.
Mhm.
But I went to a workshop, and one of the people there said, you know, you really need more women. And then that was good, because what I did is I created the characters, developed the characters, and I think it's a much more interesting story because, you know, there's more potential for conflict, more development, and it's sort of like a tree that just sort of had the roots, and it's grown, and it's
Mhm.
God knows where it's going to end, but it's been a real pleasure writing it.
Okay. How did you come up with the title Turbulence?
Oh, that's so funny. I was working with this guy Ron on screenplays, and I came up with the idea, and something popped into my mind about turbulence, and I talked to him, and I said, "Well, this is what I'm going to call it. I'm going to call it Turbulence." And he says to me, he says, "That's the worst title I've ever heard." Okay, so I was bummed out. That's an expression. And then about a day or two later, he calls me and he says, "That's brilliant. I love it." So yeah, who knows? I mean, it just seemed appropriate. I don't know what else to say. It just, because it was a turbulent era, and the only problem I have is that there's like 5 or 6 books with that title, so I had to put in a subtext
Mhm.
to, you know, sort of separate myself from the herd. But that's my inspiration. You know, just I thought about it, and there's so much material, and basically, you know, there was a show called The X Files, and at the end of that show, the narrator would go, "I did this," or "I made that," and I want to be someone who can just do that too. You know, someone can say, "I made that." So part of my legacy as a person, in my life, I want to say, yeah, Turbulence was my creation. It may not be Star Wars, but it's mine. So
Yes. Now tell us about the book cover. How did you come to
the
get the
book
book cover?
the book cover, the woman who was the publisher had to pay extra for this photo, but I wanted a photo of a protest because that's the essence of the book. So she paid X number of dollars for that. And then it was her idea to have it come out of the typewriter. And so she gave me a couple different possibilities and I combined them, but it was brilliant because Danny, the main character, is a journalist. So it was a perfect combination. And one thing I've noticed in a lot of books is that book covers can be sort of, take it or leave it. But this, in my opinion, jumps off the page at you. And if you're looking for a book, you go, oh, I like the book cover. Let me read further. And if they like what the book's about, then hopefully they'll buy it. But it was a perfect combination. I couldn't have asked for a better combination of photo and book cover. It jumps off the page. I hope.
In 3 words, what can readers expect from Turbulence?
3 words. Entertainment, nostalgia, and a cliffhanger ending.
Yes. Okay, what are you currently working on right now?
Okay, I'm working on book 2 and 3 of the series. Book 2 is about a Vietnam veteran who's sort of undercover because in those days, Vietnam veterans were very unpopular and he didn't want anyone to know that he was a vet because he would get harassed and worse. And book 3 is probably most powerful because it deals with Danny's brother who serves in Vietnam, comes home, and he has PTSD, which is like, I don't know, it's very nasty, mental issue. And he's also accused of being part of what was like a massacre, My Lai. I don't know if you remember the name, but that was a massacre of American soldiers killing Vietnamese civilians. So it was a very, very interesting combination, and I'm still working on it. But I think, the character is. I think it's a great ending. I mean, if the book series ends there, it would be great. If I want to continue, I could do about the weatherman and Nixon McGovern. I mean, there's just so much out there. But book 3 is very powerful in many ways. And, I'd like to see it out there. And I think that people will really respond to it.
Okay. How can readers find you and your book?
Oh, that's easy. Well, I'm on Amazon, of course. Everybody has to go on Amazon. That's the first place. I've gotten a lot of good reviews. I also have it as a Kindle for a much reduced price. I'm on Barnes and Nobles, Goodreads. There's a whole slew of places where you can get the book, but obviously Amazon is #1 when it comes to finding books. So Amazon or Barnes and Noble, I think, would be my 2 top options. And again, you could get it Kindle for a much reduced price, but so that's how you find the book. But make sure to put my name in or the subtext, because like I said, there's like 10 to 20 books with that title, with some variation. So that's why that's important.
Okay, what book events do you have in the next coming months, or do you have any book events?
That's funny you should ask. I tried to get my local library to do one, and they said yes, and then they canceled. I was going to do Barnes and Noble, but the local store closed down. So now I'm down to a guy who was going to do the event with Barnes and Noble was trying to do something for later in April or May. Very interesting. I took my book to the principal of the school where I work as a substitute, and he gave it to one of the teachers who teaches sort of like pop culture. She read it, and I'm waiting to hear what she thinks because I'm hoping it'll be very interesting. If she likes it, then maybe she'll include it in her curriculum, and I'll sell like 100 copies. I'll be like the outsiders, so that's where I'm at the moment.
Okay. Is there anything else you would like to add before we close?
Just that I think that there's a very strong potential for a streaming series. It's offbeat. It could
Wow.
it could easily be, well, two shows that I loved, and I hope that mine would be as good, was something called 30 Something and then The Paper Chase. If my show could be made and I could be anywhere as good as either of those shows, my life would be complete.
Well, thank you for coming in today, Louis. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
All right. This is Queenie Clem with Queenie's Book Talk and Reviews. Happy reading. Bye, y'all.